Bună dimineața! Good morning to everyone.
Dimineața tuturor! Doar un anunț tehnic. Persoanele care au nevoie de traducere se asigură traducerea sincron. Mergeți, vă rog, în spate și vă luați dispozitivele audio. Evenimentul va avea loc în ambele limbi, și română și engleză. Eu mă numesc Iulian Groza.
All of you to this pre-EPC Summit conference that we are organizing in partnership with the National Platform of the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum. This is one of the largest umbrella organizations encompassing over 100 civil society organizations from Moldova, as well with CEPS, Brussels, and I'm working here, Steven and his colleagues, and Open Society Foundations. And of course, we do this event in partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Integration, and I'm happy to greet here His Excellency Minister Nicu Popescu. Today, we plan to discuss, to debate about the expectations from the EPC Summit that will take place in Moldova on the 1st of June. We want to see this event as an opportunity to exchange among civil society, think tank community, policymakers about the expectations. I will move to Romanian now, before introducing my colleague Adrian Lupușor. Vreau încă o dată să salut pe toți și
Welcome everyone. Today, in the framework of this event, we will speak about the main expectations from the summit of the CPE, which will happen in the Republic of Moldova in Bulboaca village on June 1st. In this room, we gathered a group of experts, civil society representatives, representatives of academia, ambassadors. Well, Excellencies, I would like to welcome you. And I would like to use this opportunity to mention that this event is organized in cooperation with the Moldovan National Platform of the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum. I will now give the floor to Adrian Lupușor, facilitator, with some opening remarks. Please take the floor. Thank you, Iulian. So, dear Deputy Prime Minister, Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's true the CPE summit is genuinely a historical event for our country, and the Republic of Moldova will thus be in the epicenter of the European diplomacy, which confirms once again the European perspective of our country. So the European aspirations which we expressed during the general meeting of the citizens on May 21st, who stated that Moldova is a European state. These European aspirations are also acknowledged at the international level. I would like to emphasize that this is actually a key factor of irreversibility for the European vector of our country, which mainly depends on the support and active involvement of the civil society, of the population per ensemble in all aspects related to the European integration of the Republic of Moldova. As a representative of the civil society, I would like to confirm our firm commitment to support the policies, the reforms, which bring us closer to the European Union. And at the same time, we will stay committed to monitor independently and very accurately the European pathway taken of our country in order to support this process from the perspective of the civil society, as we used to do until now. And I remember when we were helping for the completion of the questionnaire before the Republic of Moldova obtained the status of a candidate country, and much earlier during the awareness and communication campaigns about the European values, about the importance of liberalization of the trade with the EU, about the importance of the European pathway per ensemble. And by the way, I recall last year when we launched in Belts a campaign that Moldova is a European state. That campaign was voluntarily launched by the National Platform of the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum. And we are happy that this campaign, this effort of promoting the European values is sustained, and I'm confident that it further on will be continued due to the consolidated effort of the civil society and of our government. The European perspective of our country directly depends on the quality of the civil society involvement in the processes related to the European integration. It also directly depends on the frank openness of the government in this regards. Increasing the dynamics of the dialogue with the civil society, which we witnessed in the previous time, is really a promising fact, and we welcome that. I guess we go in the right direction with that. I would like to thank you, and now to give the floor to Liliana Palihovic, who will moderate this panel, or the following panel, better said. So, dear guests, good morning. Welcome to Chișinău. Welcome at this event. I'm honored to give the floor for some welcome remarks to Excellency Nicu Popescu, Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration, who is probably the most informed person in the Republic of Moldova about the event which is going to happen in a couple of days in Chișinău, which is genuinely a historical event for the Republic of Moldova and which definitely will have an impact on the destiny of our country. That is my hope. That is the hope of all the citizens of the Republic of Moldova. Minister, you have the floor. Dear friends, I'm happy we have this opportunity to talk about the summit. When I say friends, that's not just a formality, because the majority of those present in this room are really my friends, our friends. We know each other for 10 years, even 20 years, including the foreign guests who are also our friends. And I'm pleased to state that besides IPRE, with whom we cooperate almost on a daily basis in the premises of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Julian, I've been knowing him for many, many years. And this event is co-organized by CEPS. CEPS was my first employer back in 2005 in Brussels. In September, if I'm not mistaken, when I started my activity there in the framework of this think tank in Brussels, which is represented today in Chișinău as a co-organizer of this event. I will speak a bit in Romanian, then I will also speak a bit in English so that we could directly address everybody who is interested in the summit. I will start by saying that for the Republic of Moldova, it's definitely a one-time occasion, and it's one of the most important events for the external policy of our country. At least from the moment we acquired independence until today, that's the opportunity when in Chișinău we will host high-level officials from 50 states, 50 delegations in total. Many of them will come to the Republic of Moldova for the very first time. And in discussions with them, our objective is to consolidate, to strengthen the weight, the role of the Republic of Moldova in the family of European states. You know that for the last 30 years, including in our action plan with the international partners, the Republic of Moldova went through different complicated periods of time. Isolation, failure to be persuasive enough, failure to attract friendship, support, promises. Well, at this point, this summit will really provide us a possibility to catch back with a lot of gaps, the gaps at the level of the society, at the level of our country that we had in the previous 30 years. And that's also a great investment in our relationship with absolutely every free and democratic state from Europe. Obviously, these relationships will be a starting point, a benchmark for our European pathway, our pathway for accession to the European Union. More than half of the members of the European political community are also members of the European Union. So in the following years, absolutely every step taken, absolutely every stage in our European integration pathway will be supported, voted, supported by absolutely all EU member states. In this regard, this summit is more than an opportunity, it's rather an investment in the future of our country. And obviously this summit and the European political community launched by President Macron last year, the first summit which took place in Prague in autumn last year. Well, that's an initiative that was launched in a tragic context of the Russian Federation aggression, military aggression against Ukraine, which is the biggest war which currently happens on the European continent since the Second World War. Well, this war motivated the free and democratic countries in the European continent to merge their efforts to invest in this format so that all together, via a joint effort, we could bring Europe back to the peaceful state of affairs. So including from this point of view, from this tragical background, the summit will happen in the Republic of Moldova, which is much beyond an investment, as I said. This is also a signal for the support of our country, for the peace, for the prosperity, and for our European accession pathway. It is a strong signal for our society. It's a strong signal for absolutely every state in the world that the Republic of Moldova already is part of the European family. And the Republic of Moldova does not stand alone in isolation. And you know very well that we, as a state, would fear of the most bad things for a country. So this nightmare is to ever remain isolated, alone, in difficult conditions. And yes, we currently live in a very difficult point of time in the European history. So today it's utmost imperative in these conditions to maintain the Republic of Moldova deeply rooted in the European family, enjoying the European support, so that we no longer could stay isolated, alone, to face the negative effects of this brutal war launched by the Russian Federation. And you know very well that in our country, the negative effects of the war affected every single citizen. From the point of view of energy, insecurity, disconnections of power, insecurity, uncertainties for the natural gas supply, the inflation, economic effects, destruction of certain partnerships and the trade networks, disruption of access to international trade routes via the Black Sea. Obviously, these negative effects of the war in Ukraine come to add on to the other hostile policies already being applied by the Russian Federation for the Republic of Moldova, like their support of the secessionism in the Transnistrian region, their support for the troops, Russian troops illegally staying in our country, through the embargoes repeatedly applied against our citizens. In this context, it is of a fundamental importance for us not to be left alone in these conditions, which means we should also emphasize that any element of destabilization, any attempt to disturb, to complicate our lives, including inflation, including the disruptions of power supply, will absolutely directly affect every citizen of the Republic of Moldova, regardless of their political or geopolitical preferences. And you remember well enough those days in November when we had no power supply, when the disruption of electricity because of the Russian bombings affected equally the Russian speakers, the Romanian speakers, the Ukrainian speakers in our country, the Gagauzian, the Bulgarian speakers in the territory of our country. So we are all interconnected. We all live in the same country, and we all have a common fundamental interest for the Republic of Moldova to find its place, to consolidate its place in the European family. So it is this summit that is a great opportunity for every one of us on the territory of the Republic of Moldova to make sure that there will be peace and stability. Now, if I may, I will switch to English.
With an introduction, presumably you heard it, but it's really a great pleasure to see so many friends here and colleagues and former colleagues and current colleagues. I was saying that I started my career at CEPS, one of your co-organizing organizations, co-organizers of this event. So it's really a pleasure not just to have CEPS in my life in Brussels, but also to have CEPS here in Chișinău, waving the European flag with IPRE and this is the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Platform. With the summit, some of the key elements, the truth is that most of our time these days is spent on making sure that the summit is organized well on a technical, logistical, and all other levels. So most of our time is now spent in fine-tuning what needs to be fine-tuned for the journalists, for the delegations, for the food, for the airport, for the logistics of organizing it. At the same time, in the last months, we have also been, of course, talking to the participating countries in the European political community on what do we want to achieve with this initiative. And of course, that's an ongoing conversation. What we can attest at this stage is that everyone values such an opportunity. And the attendance is going to be very, very high. We have some countries which are in natural election cycles, so some countries do not know who will be their head of government or state in the next week. But besides these countries, everyone else confirmed. So we're talking about 44 confirmations at the highest level, and today, tomorrow, maybe Monday, for some countries we will know. As I said, that's a very high level of interest, high level of support from everyone. Why? Because that's an important and unique opportunity to talk about the faith of our continent, the state of our continent. So one of the most valuable things in this community, and it's something I heard from one of our partners that is not part of the EU, was to say that inside the European Union you have regular summits, leaders regularly meet, and you can keep the pipelines of diplomatic and policy making more or less clear of lack of communication. But for countries which do not see each other monthly at a ministerial level and every few months at heads of state level, the EPC offers an opportunity for everyone to meet and to talk about our continent, about security, connectivity, energy, and many other important issues. And as you can imagine, the European Union member states are a majority of the EPC, but there are also countries which are important by virtue of their geography or size that are not yet in the European Union or are no longer in the European Union. So having this platform that brings together not just the EU member states, but also Norway, Iceland, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Moldova, Ukraine, Albania, North Macedonia, is something that everyone values and gives opportunity for the leaders and for the countries to keep the diplomatic and strategic interaction and conversation going. So there's a very large level of support for that. On top of that, or besides that, there's a conversation as to what else can be done in this community when it comes to implementing and developing concrete projects on connectivity, on energy security, on maybe cyber security, etc., etc. So as we speak, there is an ongoing dialogue between the Sherpas of the European political community, the foreign ministries, on what do we all think would be the most logical outcomes in terms of concrete initiatives from this summit. So there's multiple ideas floating from different countries, but the truth is that we will see at the summit how much concrete steps will be taken after this. We, as the Republic of Moldova, of course, are interested in many in several dimensions. I mentioned already that for us the diplomatic support and the anchoring of our country in the European family is of crucial importance. Besides that, it's important for us to develop and improve energy, societal, electricity, connectivity with the European space. And for us, that takes the very concrete form of more exchanges, more bridges, and yesterday, the day before yesterday now, we launched one new bridge with Romania, and that's the first bridge that was built in the last several decades. I think from the 60s is the first bridge open to Romania, but we want 5 or 10 more bridges. So everything that improves our connectivity is something we think is very important. At the same time, there's multiple ways of boosting connectivity. So with the summit, we will see what the conversation is. Our vision is very supportive of having this format for a strategic conversation, and we will see whether and how many countries will look into committing to specific projects. This is a bit where we are when it comes to the way we're structuring the summit, and I prefer now to leave some space for questions, and that I think would allow us to have a more targeted conversation on those elements of the summit preparation that are most relevant and interesting for you. Întrebări, vă rog.
Do we have any questions from the audience? No mic. So thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, for this introductory remark. Indeed, this event is very important for the Republic of Moldova. So that's an investment, as you have said. So this is a very valuable and significant, and it has got a very long challenge in it. And that would lead to a sustainable development, a democratic development of the Republic of Moldova in the long run. At the same time, I would like to mention the following, that from my point of view, as one conclusion from what you have already mentioned, the Republic of Moldova should somehow be part of all the political platforms that would help the Republic of Moldova to strengthen, foster its security, as well as increase and make the list of development partners bigger, longer, as well as to strengthen the democracy in the Republic of Moldova, because this is what is being expected by the citizens of the Republic of Moldova: reform the justice, a country without corruption, honest politicians working to the benefit of the citizens, as well as a country that is viewed in the best light by the others, to be proud of. So these are the elements, the underpinning elements, and these are the elements that would be also emphasized by this event that would be organized in the Republic of Moldova. And the fact that this kind of summit was accepted to be conducted in the Republic of Moldova means that the country has been acknowledged as a country contributing to regional security, not just benefiting from some advantages, but also contributing to regional security. What would be your message for the citizens of the Republic of Moldova now before the summit is started? What can everybody do in order to support the efforts of the government, of the parliament, of the institutions, in order to ensure this European integration of our country? So the same thing as we do actually can be done by the citizens, because we are all Moldovans, regardless of ethnicity or mother tongue that is being spoken in the country. When we have guests coming, so we welcome them open-heartedly, so with a lot of dishes, with attachment, commitment, and with a smile and hospitality. And you know that in the Republic of Moldova, we love being hospitable. We love having guests coming to our country. We love talking, discussing, dialoguing, as well as meeting people, talking with the people, communicating, as well as meet with the relatives, as well as with the friends on a regular basis. The same would happen here. On the occasion of this summit, the same would take place at a broader European scale, continental scale. So we'd meet with our relatives, our friends of our country, and the request and actually the predisposition of everybody that we are working in order to prepare the summit would be to be open as well as to be natural as we are in our daily interaction with the guests. So we'd have hundreds of journalists, reporters coming through the airport, staying at the hotel, taking the taxi, maybe taking train, or maybe walking in the city of Chișinău. So we have to acknowledge that, in particular on the 1st of June, so there would be a certain level of constraints and traffic jams in the center downtown of Chișinău, but also towards Bulbaca there will be some traffic jam. But it would be important to ensure the security of the leaders as well as to ensure the security of the event, logistics, and of everybody. That presupposes to have certain behavioral protocols that would be different from our ordinary life or daily life. But this is absolutely normal. Please stay with us and be patient, because we are not so accustomed to support the preparation of such kind of event, but an important event for everybody should entail certain kind of challenges, might generate some inconveniences, minor ones. But if you want to invite somebody to a party, to a birthday, to a baptizing, to a wedding, theoretically you have some kind of inconveniences, right? You have to go to supermarket, you have to buy a lot of bags, you have to buy and to wash dishes, because any type of investments in our interhuman relationship presuppose certain kind of trade-off inconveniences, but they're absolutely natural. And the same I would like to give as a message to our citizens. So this event is indeed very important for us. It's important for everybody to be like we are, naturally behaving, open in our heart, in ourselves, a smile, a good mood disposition, as well as with the capacity just to wake up on the 2nd of June, be satisfied and content with the organization of that particular. These minor inconveniences that some of the people would feel would be quickly forgotten by everybody, but that would give us an opportunity, a lot of values would be given, would open new paths and courses and possibilities to promote the Republic of Moldova accession to European Union family. And that would be felt for many, many years ahead. Until I would give questions to the other people, I have another question. Is it possible to tell us, can you tell us, please, whether there is some space in that particular agenda to speak about the challenges during the summit, about the challenges of the Republic of Moldova? Would you have some discussions that would be dedicated to that? Or would you just be discussing challenges at European continental level? Or would you have the possibility to speak about the challenges for the Republic of Moldova? Indeed, for the Republic of Moldova, this is a very important summit, and Moldova is a place where this kind of summit is organized with the participation of all the European leaders. And how the discussions will be structured during this summit is actually all this kind of discussions would be focused on the state of play on the continent. But since the summit is taking place in the Republic of Moldova, indeed, and which is very close to the area of military actions from Ukraine. Indeed, the regional context, including the role of the Republic of Moldova in that particular context, indeed, that would be also addressed and discussed. And that would be a subject that would be addressed and discussed both formally and informally during this summit. Of course, this is not a big secret, but very oftentimes the most important issues and the most inciting, interesting discussion during such kind of summit do not take place in a plenary session or a mic. Usually this is done informally during coffee breaks or lunch breaks, when very important specific issues are being discussed, frankly discussed, including the issue about the Moldova fate. And very oftentimes, so this kind of summits are being structured in a certain way where you have like 3-4 hours with formal interaction discussions, and then you have more time for informal, less formal discussions to be organized, be focused and targeted on outcomes, and that would be done without the mic. And certain kind of decisions will be taken informally and then be formalized and used and applied by the administration of these countries. So once again, the request would be not just to focus on what is being heard formally on the mic, because this kind of summit would generate a lot of energy in order to progress on various issues, important issues for the Republic of Moldova. question. And the question is so whether you will be addressing the issues referring to the Republic of Moldova fate, and we would be very much interested to know whether in that particular agenda the issues of defense and security can be for European continent, for all the leaders that would come to the Republic of Moldova to attend. Because during the previous summit in Prague, actually two energy transition, as well as the climate protection. And during the summit in Chișinău, in the Republic of Moldova, in the Mimi Castle in Bulboca. So we are still finalizing, we're still fine-tuning the discussions, but indeed we will be discussing everything related to security and peace on the European continent. So there will be some working groups whereby the leaders will be talking about security, peace and defense. Indeed, that would be a topic. And then we are now thinking about the second or third working group or pillar that would also be part of that particular discussion. And during these kind of days, we are finalizing and fine-tuning, polishing the agenda. It will depend on the interest of the state to be part of a certain working group during that particular summit. In the framework of that particular summit, there will be some announcements made also related to the Republic of Moldova, and they will be related to security and defense. So thereby they will not be part of the European political community initiative, but some of the leaders stability on the territory of the Republic of Moldova. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Do we have some other comments, questions from the audience? So we highly appreciate the possibility to attend this discussion. Very important EPC summit event.
We will continue our discussions with further distinguished speakers. Into the European External Action Service and former Director of the European Council for Foreign Relations in Madrid. Please. Thank you. Mr. Steven Blockmans, Director of Research at the Center for European Policy Studies and Professor at the College of Europe. Mr. Jakob Hendenskog, Analyst at Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at Swedish Institute of International Studies, and an expert with experience in studying Russian and Eastern Europe, as well studying in particular Ukraine, Moldova and Belarus. Mr. Julian Groza, the Executive Director of the Institute for European Policies and Reforms and former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration of the Republic of Moldova. Ms. Oana Popescu-Zamfir, Director of Global Focus and former advisor to the Romanian Senate President and former State Secretary for European Affairs at the Ministry of Labour, Family, Social Security and the Elderly. And Mr. Leo Litra, Senior Policy Analyst at the New Europe Center and former Deputy Director at the IDIS Viitorul in Chișinău. as it was mentioned in the speech of His Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Popescu, the event that will take place on June 1st in the Republic of Moldova is a symbolic moment that represents both international recognition of Moldova's efforts towards European integration and its contribution to the regional security, and as well it represents a huge responsibility for this country. It's for the first time when our country is hosting up to 50 heads of governments and heads of states and European officials, and it was already mentioned about challenges, infrastructure challenges and many other challenges, but this is also a good moment to increase the list of friends of the Republic of Moldova and also to discuss about plans how we may strengthen the security in the region in the context of the war and Russian invasion in Ukraine. It has mentioned for many numerous occasions that the European political community is not a replacement of the EU enlargement policy, but it's rather a platform for European countries in finding ways and jointly address democratic and economic and security challenges. It's very clear that EU has a crucial role in this regard. In this context, I will address my first question to Mr. Lacheras. From your perspective, how does the EPC fit into the broader European architecture designs, and what can be, and what can be the contribution to this of the European Political Community Summit?
First of all, now? Yeah. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers. I'm aware that, well, you have a lot of officials now working on the conference next week. Organizing these seminars are no small feat, so thank you very much to all involved. I know it's a big logistical issue. And the timing, it's great. To clarify, what I'm going to say has nothing to do with my other job title, so just in case I get entangled into some of the things that I say now, these are just personal reflections. Well, maybe to clarify, I'm quite clean with the European political community because when it was proposed, I was actually in Ukraine with my Ukrainian friends working on the ground during the full-scale invasion, so I don't have biases neither against nor in favor, as I sense that a lot of people do have. I see this as the latest iteration of the tendency of Europeans to design big European organizations and pan-European institutions. So I think we will struggle to find a continent that, has designed so many institutions in very few decades and with different names. And when you talk to Asians, it's very difficult to clarify what is the OSCE, the OECDE, etc. Anyway, so that's a bit of a joke. But in all these institutions, I have identified, or these big ideas, I have identified several categories of people that are actually behind. First of all, you have the visionaries, those that come up with the great ideas, and people tend to forget about them over time. No one remembers them, but they come back with these great ideas about what Europe should look like. Then you have Caesar, like the political chiefs that see their legacy in providing another grand idea to Europe before they get politically murdered. So they see this as their legacies, and sometimes Caesars are visionaries. Then you have, to me, the most important category, the task masters, the overseers, the ones, I call them the builders, the ones that once Caesar is gone and there's another Caesar, they actually carry out the project and they make it fitting for the Europeans. And then of course you have the managers, and we in Europe know a lot about managers. So in my view, unfortunately Europe has too few task masters, too few builders, and too many managers, and at some point too many visionaries that, you know, just write their dossier and they never follow up. And I think, if I quote my friend and writer Yuri Andruchovich, you know, we still, in Europe, we have too few heroes as well. And in a way, this is what I want to mention, that Ukraine and Moldova have given a new sense to Europe, also because of their heroism. They have a new sense, they have given a new sense to what it looks like being European nowadays. So that will be a first purpose to the European political community. That's a new purpose to the notion of quote-unquote Europe, a new Europe. Then the secondly is the global agenda, the digital question, the green agenda, where we may have found out that the EU is not enough. And obviously NATO is not enough. I know NATO is also looking for some kind of role in the green agenda, but I think that's a mistake. And then there's, of course, Russia. Obviously, every institution needs a foe, and Russia has fit very well the category of being the foe. And I think with this, we finally dispel the notion that Putin's Russia can be part of Europe, and I have to be very frank, because it's we brought them back to the Council of Europe in 2019 for no purpose, and now they're basically destroying the Council of Europe legacy in Russia. So I think it's great that Russia is not there. The problem that I see with the European political community is when I think of most pan-European institutions, take the OSCE, take the Council of Europe, they had a clear purpose from birth. OSCE, the conflicting Council of Europe, a pan-European legal architecture that's still valid. The EU had a very clear purpose in the 50s, and well, then the European economic communities, and it has been acquiring new purposes over time, fighting the pandemic, l'Europe qui protège, protecting Europe, fighting the crisis, and providing peace. I think the challenge that we have to address today is that the problem with the European political community is that it has an unclear purpose at birth from the very beginning. It's not quite shared across the spectrum. And that's quite unique to European political community, because all the other institutions I mentioned, they had a clear purpose from birth, even though over time they might lose purpose. Now, maybe concluding, the thing is, these projects, they need to provide something to everyone, to all of the stakeholders, something. And I mentioned, to France and Macron, obviously, clear purpose. You know, another French president providing big ideas on Europe, purpose number one. And initially, to be frank, you know, a sort of waiting hall for enlargement, even though that purpose has lost momentum, thankfully. To the UK, I think it's pretty clear. It's the first time in years they can connect with something called Europe, and it brings them back to the fold. Obviously, a clear purpose, and Sunak has been quite clear in identifying that. To the candidate countries, Moldova, Ukraine, now that I think we all have made efforts to clarify that this is not a substitute for enlargement, I see deliverables. I think this can be building blocks towards the EU, but also, as the minister has mentioned before, deliverables, some things that they actually need now, connectivity, energy, etc., and that maybe the EU is not enough to provide. We can call this organic integration, so a sort of building block towards being more connected to broader Europe. It is also a distraction, though, as well, if I can be frank, because some of these countries have pressing national security concerns, and organizing these summits is obviously very complicated. But it's good that they're in the spotlight, and it's good that we see Moldova hosting the summit. And to the foes like the Azeris and the Armenians, maybe at the conflicting platform, but I'm not entirely sure it will serve a purpose in that regard. Serbia and Kosovo the same, but it can be useful. To the EU, if I can be very frank, it gives them something to please Macron as well, but also something to enable EU policies where they're on their own, they're not enough. Now, to Germany, it's an open question what the European political community provides, and I think that explains their reluctance. To conclude, So I just wanted to lay out these questions maybe to clarify and to make progress, because we need to clarify ideally what is it that this EPC can do. I personally see value in the EPC, in deliverables, and in practical projects. So, and it has to, there are some ideas there. Connectivity, as is mentioned, Moldova and Spain will be chairing one of the groups in the summit. I think it has to deliver. Maybe some strategic purpose. Maybe some people call it speed dating, others call it strategic intimacy. I think there's value that ministers do a speed dating, and that we have communicating dots between the different. We had Reykjavik. Now we're going to have Reykjavik for the Council of Europe, but we're going to have Chișinău. I think, although it's an organizational hustle, I think it makes some sense that different prime ministers that don't meet up regularly in the EU meet up in broader settings, and that they together find this sort of strategic purpose. But maybe I will conclude quoting Tony Judd in his A Great Illusion on Europe, and he concluded the book mentioning that, well, Europe is more than a geographical notion, but it's less than an answer, and we're still trying to find these answers. My sense is that this summit and its follow-up in Granada in Spain in October will be key for the European political community to deliver, to provide deliverables, lest it dies a long birth. Thank you.
Thank you to you. Yes, I hope that this event also will provide something to all, and I hope also that EPC will contribute also to the organic integration of Moldova and Ukraine in the big European family. So as far as we know, the European political community is functioning today rather as an informal high-level platform, where the European leaders are gathering to discuss on subject of common interest and possible solutions on security, stability, and prosperity of the European continent. And as we know, the first summit didn't have a final declaration. As far as we know about the second one, also that there are no discussions at this moment about any final declaration after the summit. More, it's about the commitments made by the leaders, about joint actions on the subject of huge interest for majority of participants. So my question will go to Mr. Blockman. How do you think? What should be done in order to boost this the political legitimacy of EPC summit and encourage the EU and participating European countries to transform their commitments and their pledges into policies and actions after these big political events and discussions?
Yeah, thank you, Liliana. And first of all, of course, thanks also to IPRE for convening this meeting. It was great to cooperate with you on this, and the national platform as well, of course. Well, I mean, your question goes to the heart of some of the conundrums that the Borja has already mapped out. How to show added value for yet another platform which is less institutionalized, as we have so many international organizations in Europe as already, then some might expect or wish to see. Without final declaration, without formal input papers, and only very limited opportunities for plenary forms of press communication. It looks like a rather fragmented, or risks being looked at as a rather fragmented congregation of leaders. There is merit, of course, in bringing them together, in sharing some of the visions that some may have about the future of Europe, with or without Russia. I mean, the question will have to be answered over time, what to do with Russia, of course. But in order to enhance legitimacy of the entire endeavor, one would indeed expect deliverables, which in Prague have been defined as convening the leaders, not much more. I mean, there have been incidental commitments made, of course, we know them, not just reference to the meeting between Aliyev and Pashinyan with Macron and Charles Michel, leading to a decision to launch a European Common Security and Defense Policy mission on the Armenian side of the border, which has since received continuation and a larger mandate. That is a concrete deliverable from at least the meeting that took place in EPC context, but it is not, of course, singularly EPC branded, if you want, because the negotiations between the two countries have been facilitated by many externals, with a long prehistory, leading to implementation tracks which pass through Washington or through Moscow or indeed through Brussels. So what is uniquely EPC as a deliverable is very hard, I think, to pinpoint. But if the congregation can at least serve as a platform to facilitate, accelerate those type of processes that lead to deliverables, then I think that's clear value added. Now, in order to increase legitimacy, I think it is absolutely necessary that it is flanked by meetings such as this, civil society-owned meetings which reflect and provide a sounding board function to our leaders and also, of course, to the wider public. Transparency in this respect is absolutely key and largely missing from the EPC as such. No written documents, fragmented press conferences with some dissonance between statements made by our dear leaders. And so I think there's a task for the civil society organizations in particular to try and support this effort to enhance transparency about the commitments or decisions taken at EPC level, to try and document them, and then to see how they might receive follow-up in concrete implementation. And so one of the ideas that we'll be discussing with some of you in the audience later today is exactly the creation of a sort of monitor or observatory or a tracker of policy implementation of EPC commitments made. And I think that too might enhance again the legitimacy of the entire summitry which is happening, but also the concrete follow-up from one presidency holder to the next, in handing over in a more transparent and public fashion, perhaps, than hitherto has happened, the file on which needs to be worked, and perhaps over time, without creating a heavy architecture around the EPC, so as to keep it nimble as a speed dating platform for leaders, there might at least be a form of monitoring of the decisions. Ultimately, what is key, and Borja mentioned this as well, it was mentioned earlier by the minister too, is of course that the channels of implementation will have to include better endowed with human resources and financial means, better endowed institutions, not only the European Union, I suppose, for some unilateral type of decisions taken, but also other institutions like the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or other facilities that will spur policy implementation. I think all of this together will ultimately enhance the legitimacy of the EPC as a summit platform, and indeed encourage individual member states to honor the commitments which their leaders have made, you know, in the corridors or to part of the assembled press.
Thank you very much for your ideas and also for the idea of tracker of
Microphone, please. Microphone. Microphone, please.
To events, to summits, and also to see how the commitments of political leaders have influenced the security of our continent. Mulțumesc. And also we have to mention the invasion of Russia and the war in Ukraine has influenced a lot and has increased a lot the threats to the security of European countries. So also in the last year we had the possibility to see how efficient are the international organizations that have a task on negotiations on the subject, on security subjects. So we saw what was the reaction of Russia in the UN Security Council when the issue of war in Ukraine was discussed. We saw how the discussions are blocked in the OSCE and how important issue to connected to the security of the countries members of the OSCE are blocked by one member of the organization. My question now will be to Mr. Henderskog. How do you think, what is the EPC the right platform that may bring more added value to the discussion for enhancing the security in the region? It's clear that EPC is not replacing this organization, but what are the new aspects that made this format of and platform of discussion bring to the security of the continent?
Thank you, Liliana. Thank you for the organizers of this conference. It is not a simple question. Like Borja, I also value the format, EPC format, as a valuable format in the current situation, marked by Russia's war in Ukraine and the general heating of the geopolitical rivalries. Russia's aggression has made the OSCE and Council of Europe temporarily out of order, and the EPC's inclusive format, in fact, mirrors that of the Council of Europe, with the EPC as the governmental counterpart of Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly. The creation of an inclusive European format without Russia is crucial. With Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, Europe faces the most serious challenge of its security, prosperity, and long-term future in general since the Second World War. There is no stability or security possible with Putin's Russia. A change in the political leadership in Russia is necessary, but far from sufficient condition for a positive development in Russia's domestic politics and its external actions. Russia is now preparing for a long war and sees war as the new normal. There is little the West can do to influence the course of Russian politics in the short term. Russia is a problem that cannot be solved. It will have to be managed for a long time. However, what we do or what we don't do today will decide the fundamentals of Russia's future as well. The most important way in which we can invest in a better future Russia, and therefore peace and security, is making sure that Ukraine succeeds in defending its sovereignty and territorial integrity, in its European integration and its safeguarding of democracy, human rights and rule of law, and that Russia's aims are thwarted. Can that happen in Ukraine? It could eventually happen in Russia too. The European political community is not the ultimate setting for addressing collective security and stability in Europe or to establish the European security order. It has to be done step by step in various formats. The EPC cannot and should not replicate the EU or NATO. The EPC should not regard be regarded as a substitute for e-enlargement, but as an inclusive forum for dialogue. Ukraine will have to be given security guarantees in the future, and such could only be provided by NATO. The lesson learned from the last 3 decades is that there is no safe space between Euro-Atlantic communities and Russia. But the EPC has indeed, as mentioned by several speakers, a potential as an informal geopolitical platform. Having the second EPC summit in Moldova, a EU candidate country in close proximity to the war in Ukraine, a country constantly under the threat of hybrid war from Russia, is a strong message in itself to Russia in the rebuilding of the European security architecture. So the meeting itself is the message.
Thank you. Thank you. And in continuation to the question that addressed to you, I will move to Ms. Popescu-Zamfir, asking her how should the EPC avoid duplication with existing formats mentioned above, and also ensure cooperation approach towards strengthening the democracy, the rule of law, the respect of human rights, and also the collective security in the Europe.
Thank you for the question. I think it's fine now. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation, obviously. The more I listen to my co-panelists, the more I'm convinced that at this point, I'm skeptical of the EPC as an organization, but I'm not skeptical of its functionality. And to be honest, the reason for skepticism toward it as an organization is that clearly there are overlaps with existing organizations. It was born vague, and it hasn't necessarily acquired more structure. It's easy to discard it as another of Macron's crazy ideas. And also we have in this region a lot of experience with failed organizations. We have tried many of them. Most of them are still in existence, although their deliverables are at best of marginal relevance. However, this is a time of huge challenges in Europe that all of these organizations that EPC might be overlapping with are having trouble dealing with. And one of the reasons for this is precisely their institutional structure. So, to be honest, I think at this point, I'm less worried about the lack of structure, and even tempted to think that less structure is better, because with EU enlargement and EU reform, we are experiencing precisely the deadlocks that come with too much structure. And at this point, there are so many things that we need to change. There are so many deep discussions about how to move forward, that especially in a format that, let's not forget, takes place at the level of heads of state and government. So this is eminently political. It's not institutional. It's not at the level of managers or task forces and so on. At least not yet. It is eminently political, and I do believe that the mere presence of these people in Chișinău, the fact that they're coming, testifies to the value of EPC as a venue for informal conversations that will, whose deliverables, let's say, will then likely be channeled to other existing organizations. So, and Nicu Popescu was rightly saying, some of the most interesting conversations will take place on the margins, not at the microphone. Some of them might take place in mini formats. And again, I think that's very likely a good thing, because again, I compare with the way the EU at 27 is working at present. We are having issues with defining where the line, the kind of the space for agreement among all member states is within an organization of 27 members. Now, think about what the lowest common denominator might be for an organization of 50 member states. So that is why I'm saying, at least for now, because I think this is likely organic. It might fail. I think it's really way too early to say what's going to happen to the EPC even 1 year from now. It might very well end up like many of the other organizations with more structure, but not necessarily very ambitious deliverables. Or it may remain for as long as it's valuable as a locus for political conversation, it might remain exactly that. And frankly speaking, after touring many of the European capitals and seeing the really unprecedented level of support for Moldova, I have never, and as a Romanian analyst, obviously, we've been following very closely what's been happening in Moldova since its independence. I don't think I have ever seen this level of commitment to supporting Chișinău. And this is to a large extent the result, obviously, of the government's pro-European commitment, of the war. Much of it, we shouldn't shy away from saying it, is not necessarily directly linked to Moldova's merits or something like that. But so much of it is the result of Nicu Popescu and President Maia Sandu and everybody else engaging in a sustained campaign of simply networking with all of their European and Euro-Atlantic counterparts on a permanent basis. So I would say never underestimate the sheer value of networking at the highest political level. And this is what Moldova is getting out of this summit. I think it's extremely valuable. It didn't used to be part of these high-level conversations on a regular basis. The simple fact that it not only takes part in it, but organizes it, and that allows it to have this permanent interaction. And I don't even want to think about the amount of correspondence and of logistical work that goes into harmonizing interests and positions and logistics with all the attending countries these weeks. So the simple fact that it's doing that and that it's in the limelight, I think is a huge step forward for the country. And as it has been pointed out, I think we have recently found out what the borders of Europe are. And we haven't necessarily come to terms completely with that. I think we have had that insight, but we haven't digested it yet, and we don't know what exactly it means. And I think the EPC allows for this projection of a wider, more comprehensive idea of Europe that's still in the making, that's still being defined. But again, perhaps the lack of very strict structure is exactly what allows for for all of these organic discussions, some of which will generate long-term results, some of which will just die out. But I think the process at this point is at least as important as the results. So essentially, that is my very long and convoluted answer to a very simple and clear question. But I think, like I said, at this point, it's more the questions that are put on the table by the EPC summit than the answers that it's capable of giving.
Thank you, Juana, for your answer, and let's hope that the crazy ideas will bring more peace on the continent, and also less structure will bring more efficient solutions for peace here in Europe. And today, I think two countries are very, very interested to participate in discussions of the EPC, and this is Ukraine and Moldova. And taking into account that one subject in the agenda of the EPC will be the joint efforts for peace and security, and also energy resilience and interconnections in Europe. So my question will be to Mr. Litra. how do you think how the discussions on the peace and security will help Ukraine, and taking into account that the context, the existing context, do you think that the commitments that may be made by political leaders participating in this summit will, how they will help Ukraine to win this war and to restore peace, and also in long term speaking, how these commitments may help Ukraine in rebuilding the country, in reconstructing the country after the war?
Yes, thank you very much for your question and for the opportunity of being here and delivering some of the thoughts I have. And you know, answering, I mean, very short your question. I'll go to the long answer, but shortly answering the question is, of course, all these topics and areas which you mentioned in your question will help Ukraine if this happens. Because so far it's a concept. We don't know what kind of animal is EPC still, because it's in the making. We saw the first summit in Prague, and we do not feel yet the borders of this concept. Yeah, we will see what happens in Chișinău, how it's framed, and then it will be passed to Spain, as far as I know. So I think this is the way we should look at this. And I remember one my coordinator of my PhD thesis, which I did not finish still, but he was saying, after reading my drafts, he was all the time saying, I'm still confused, but at a higher level, you know. So after discussing the EPC all the time, I'm still confused, but at a higher level, because we still get more and more ideas, and we try to frame it, and we try to understand what kind of initiative and how to make it function. This is the most important, and you know, being almost the last speaker, of course, some of the ideas I wanted to say were mentioned by previous speakers. But maybe just to go a little bit into the Ukraine expectations and how in Kyiv this is seen from people I talk to. Of course, this is a miracle that the summit happens in Moldova. I mean, given the context, and especially it's a miracle because of the war, yeah? Because Moldova is, in essence, is fighting a sort of the war without military, but you have all the types of, you know, attempts from the Russian side to we see in Moldova to influence the country. And now, when we look at the expectations from Ukraine, let's maybe compare this against the priorities of Ukraine and the ideas we heard that the summit might include in its agenda. So Ukraine has, just from like from what I see in the public and from the statements of officials, about 6-7 priorities like these days. Is weapons, security guarantees, ideally NATO, and the previous colleague mentioned this, which I think is very important. Third point is sanctions. Fourth is financial support. Fifth is EU membership. Maybe EU membership could be, I mean, in the long term, it could be higher on the priority, but in the current context, I think it's here. And we have reconstruction at the end. And I see the EPC precisely that it might not deliver a specific result based on these priorities, but it might help, you know, organize the support, organize the basically pushing this in the pipeline, some decisions that would help on these priorities of Ukraine. In Kyiv, people are quite often feeling nervous that so many in the international community are discussing reconstruction of Ukraine, because we still have to win the war, and they say that, look, I mean, you cannot start reconstruction of Ukraine if you don't have, one, security guarantees, and you don't have also, because nobody is going to invest, I mean, this is absolutely normal. And second, the second reason for reconstruction, I mean, the second precondition for reconstruction would be, of course, the rule of law, anti-corruption, and so we have public tenders, we have normal, reconstruction that fits under the concept of what does it mean to have European practices. I mean, my question is if Zelensky comes at the EPC summit. I mean, this is, I think, big question, and we won't find the answer for sure, because, security implications involve the fact that he would likely not disclose his plans before we see him here. But my feeling is that he will be here, and I see at least few reasons why he should be here. From my perspective, is that well, there would be 44 leaders of the countries. I mean, he met some of them already at G7 and the side event with the Global South, but still many of them he would see for the first time since the war started. So this, I think, it's important to organize the support of Ukraine more and more and expand the coalition of support for Ukraine. And also for the reason that, Ukraine has the second largest border with Moldova after Russia. It's 1,222 kilometers. So it's a very big border, and for Ukraine, a safe Moldova, pro-European Moldova means it's also good for Ukraine. So I think that for now there are no suspicions that the country's leadership is not doing this job. I think Moldovans did very well, and Minister Popescu mentioned this, did very well in trying to support Ukraine from its rather limited possibilities. But still, I think this help is very much appreciated, because imagine a Moldova which is not on the right side of the history. That would be a very big problem for Ukraine, certainly. And I think we discussed about some of the speakers touched upon the issue of EU enlargement. I think I remember when Macron delivered his speech on, I think it was May 9th last year, and then a couple of days after, it was Charles Michel who tried to unpack a little bit the EPC and mentioned that there should be no discussion about EU enlargement at the EPC, because there are countries with various ambitions. And I actually think this would be the right thing to do, because countries like Ukraine, countries like Moldova, and some other candidate countries in the Balkans, they have a very different level of discussion, very precise discussion about enlargement, and it would be difficult for me to see how we can discuss enlargement together with countries who have no such ambition. I mean, that would lower the quality of and the ambition during the discussions. But I think that security should become the key issue to be discussed. And I'm very sorry that also that there will be no final communique. I understand that it's different. However, I think one should have tried maybe to have a final communique, because if we compare the member states of the EPC and we compare the UN resolution on February 23, we will see that it's only two countries which did not vote for resolution. Armenia abstained, and Azerbaijan did not vote. I mean, they did not vote at all. I mean, which is also in a way abstained, yeah? Well, the rest of the countries voted in favor of the resolution. So I think we could have had such a resolution here. I mean, that we need to use this instrument to streamline the end of the war, because if EPC is about security, it's about socialization between, it's about more Europe in Europe, if I can say like this, then ending the war should be one of the top priorities and should be discussed. Maybe someone could have abstained, but I don't think even Armenia or Azerbaijan is against ending the war, just that Armenia has a little bit different situation. So I'll stop here, but I'll be happy to confuse you more with the EPC. Yeah?
Thank you, Leo. I am sure that Ukraine will win the war, and the aggressor will be punished for what they did in Europe and what they did against the Ukrainians too. So let's hope that the European leaders will come to strong commitments regarding joint activities on enhancing the security of the continent, and also will come to joint decision for more support for Ukraine that will bring more peace from my point of view in the region. So I mentioned that two countries that are very interested in the subject that will be discussed at this summit are Ukraine and Moldova. And for the last 10-15 years, Moldova is working very hard to move forward on its European path, European integration, and my question will be to Mr. Groza, who has an experience to contribute to the activities oriented to Moldovan integration in European Union. In your experience as Deputy Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration, you was involved in the process of negotiating the association agreement, and now in the context of the EPC summit, my question is to you, do you think that this summit may bring some more possible offers to Republic of Moldova on its European path, and also what Moldova should do more for becoming a member of European Union?
Thank you, Liliana, and thank you for moderating brilliantly this distinguished panel with my colleagues and friends. Of course, I just need to repeat that the European political community is not about EU enlargement, even though it was attempted to help to steer with the discussions styled on the enlargement. For Moldova, I think the European political community summit provides a crucial opportunity to push the country into playing a more active geopolitical role in the region. I think that is what it is all about, and the fact that Moldova was selected to host this summit in the time of war. Moldova is the most affected country after Ukraine due to Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and we are subject to hybrid aggression from Russia. So choosing Moldova as a host for this summit already is a great signal of support and solidarity, not only with Ukraine, to the region, but also with Moldova. And I think from that perspective, I think this is something which we should more reflect about that. But talking about the enlargement process in the EU, of course, the format, this very much informal setup of high-level kind of exchanges, it provides opportunities for this couloir or side discussions about what should be done to help countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia potentially to advance its way towards the EU, just for the fact that majority of the EPC countries are members of the European Union. But of course, Moldova's path towards the European Union is first and foremost dependent on what we do here in terms of commitments, in terms of reforms, in terms of transformation processes, in terms of how we advance on our path. But also Moldova's European path is also directly dependent on how this war ends, and in that sense, I think Moldova can also advance towards European integration process while doing what it can to support Ukraine. Alongside, I mean, joining this coalition of support of Ukraine, that is an important signal for the region, for the countries, and I think the fact that again, that this summit is hosted here, it provides a good opportunity to look into that. There are more things that, of course, are important if to look from the European kind of that dimension of this format, of this European political community. Now, as we have seen the previous summit and the current summit, and how rightly mentioned by previous speakers, the current event is more, of course, triggered by the topic of peace and security. And this is something which continues to be on the agenda, and that is normal because Ukraine needs to be supported to end the war. And of course, we have seen a lot of discussions about reconstruction of Ukraine. And I think all the topics which are currently set for the discussions in this summit will help Ukraine, and also it helps Moldova, because looking towards the future in terms of connectivity, in terms of energy, in terms of other projects, they all are very much related to the hard component of what means our connection towards the rest of Europe. And I think what it is also important is which shouldn't be overlooked when going down a bit from the high-level discussions is how this format and how this summit can really benefit the citizens. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the people. People's security, people prosperity, and stability, and I think that should be very much important whenever we have the more kind of forward-looking ideas, or discussions, projects. But I think what it is most important is to see how at the end of the day this opportunity which was offered to Moldova. Again, to not only to be on the spot playing an important role in setting, if you want, a European agenda of discussions. It also, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I think I just underlined that for us it's a great opportunity, even though being a tiny country. Vulnerabilized country affected by many factors, still it provides us a great opportunity to be more active and emerging, if you want, a country with a possible contribution to the geopolitical context and regional stability and security. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian, and thank you to all speakers. And now we'll move to the part of the discussion, questions and answers. And please, who wants to address questions to our distinguished speakers and panelists? If no, if there are no questions in the room, I will come back to Julian. And I will ask him a little bit more about Moldova, if the summit is here in the Republic of Moldova, and continuing the discussion about the European path. Yes, we understand that the summit is not about the European integration, but also this is a great opportunity for the Republic of Moldova to speak about this country, to speak about challenges, and also about what Moldova managed to do in reforming the country. May you share your thoughts about progresses that Moldova made in the last years in reforming the judicial system, what was done in fighting corruption, and do you think that we may count any progresses on bringing oligarchs to the justice, and how this may influence the European path of the Republic of Moldova. It's good to have many friends, many countries supporting you, but at the same time it's important to work very hard in the country and to implement all the reforms. How do you evaluate at this stage the progresses that Moldova made on this dimension?
Again, Ukraine and Moldova plays an important role, I think, for the European security. And I think that is crucial also for the European Union. The path, the European integration path that Moldova adopted for many years has one of the, I think, in my opinion, one of the main, basically, deliverables of this path is to build up the country as a stable, prosperous, resilient country. And I think that should be very much our understanding about what is the purpose of our European path towards the European Union. And what this means is basically building resilient institutions. Resilient to and address, the various vulnerabilities that have been exposed already by many crises that we have seen, and making the country stronger against hybrid aggression instruments, which unfortunately for years has kept the country into a vicious circle without a clear kind of sense of direction. Well, now we are a candidate country and we have a clear sense of direction, but for that to happen, it is very important for us to continue the effort of addressing the key problems and the key challenges the country is facing. Justice, corruption, the role of kleptocrats, limiting the role of kleptocrats, bringing them to justice. I think it's really important because it will have a multiplying effect to the whole, transformation process in the country. And the role of our partners, the European Union, US, UK, and other countries is crucial in that effort. It's not only about, supporting the reform process and supporting the investments, but also it's basically working together to address the impact that the kleptocrats have and proxies have been using to keep Moldova kind of hostage to malign interests and objectives of Russia, for example. So, I mean, efforts like supporting the sanction policies, I think that is something which is important, and I think and relevant for us. And security, again, is the second, if not now, I think the number one concern for my country. And I think the war has exposed a lot of vulnerabilities, but at the same time provided new opportunities for Moldova to fast track, to find shortcuts with the support of the EU, with the support of NATO countries, to enhance our security resilience and capabilities. And I think EU here played an important role. Over the last year has been done what has not been done since our independence. Doubling our defense budget, providing targeted support in terms of expertise and strategic and operational support in terms of the security and defense capabilities. Just started a new EU CSDP mission here to help Moldova to address and increase its capacities in terms of security and defense and so on and so forth. And all these things I think are important. And if we want really to ensure kind of a stable and irreversible process of transformation and joining to the European Union, these two, I think, sectors, security and strengthening our resilient institutions in terms of coping with the threats, internal threats we face. That means investing in more, focusing on justice and anti-corruption effort. I think that would be a good recipe for us, to deal with other challenges and commitments that we need to embark on our way to the European Union.
Thank you. Please, Leo.
Yes, I would like to reflect a little bit on what Julian said, and if I may just to add a few things. I think what Julian mentioned about reforms is very important indeed, and we know that the positive track record of these reforms would influence a lot on the future membership of Moldova and Ukraine in the EU, but I would like also to underline that currently I think security is more important, and I'll explain you why. If you remember the speech of Putin when the war started, he had a long part of this speech dedicated to the fact that Ukraine is building independent anti-corruption bodies, that its policy in fighting corruption is becoming successful. And he was, of course, putting this into very different perspective. He was saying, like, you know, you see there is foreign, basically, influence in Ukraine that is taking over some of the Ukrainian bodies, and, you know, they do things, so blah, blah, blah. It's just that how much the aggressor is disturbed by successful reforms in these countries. But as we know, NATO was usually in Central Europe was the first organization to expand or to enlarge, and then it was EU. So it was, and it's very logical because you get security and then you get the right conditions for reforms and development. And I think this is what it should happen. And I always say in Ukraine to my Ukrainian friends and to my basically friends in the Euro-Atlantic space that this is a very good deal now. If you give membership of NATO membership to Ukraine, you basically give one membership, but you save two countries, because Moldova would be NATO locked basically, and it will allow it will give this security perspective, it will be this security assurance in a way for, you know, concentrating more maybe on reforms, or maybe, I don't know, in the future maybe Moldova would reconsider its neutrality. And I also think that Ukraine gives right now Moldova a very good chance to reconsider and do fast track on security and a lot of issues which have been, frankly speaking, overlooked by many governments previously. Some of them because they did not feel the threat, and some of them because on purpose, I think, on purpose it was meant to weaken. And Moldova now does the same mistake which Ukraine did before, when it was just trying to, you know, to say to people who are who were working for Russia in Ukraine, saying, you know, you shouldn't do this. They were telling this to Medvedchuk, yeah, and you shouldn't do this. This is not good. Moldova does the same now. Instead of just curbing this influence, it plays very soft, as it would be no war next to Moldova. So I'm calling for more action. That's what I'm saying.
Do we have questions? Yes, please. The first one. The microphone in the first row. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this working?
Yes.
Perfect. This is coming from Spain for this summit, professor of University Carlos III.
I think he doesn't. I mean, we hear you, but
there is
no translators.
Yeah. Is it better now? But this is green already. Yes. But it was green already. Okay. Good morning. This is Ilke Toyger, professor in University Carlos III of Madrid. Thank you very much for these insightful comments. I think what my clear takeaway from your interventions is that we are all convinced about the symbolic value of organizing European Political Community Summit in Moldova. We like the photo op and we are very happy about it, but we question the deliverables that could come out of it, both here in Moldova and also in Grenada in October. So if you were the advisors of these politicians, and some of you are already very much linked to them, what would be your core suggestions as deliverables here in Chișinău and also in Grenada? As headlines, please, so that we can track them in the afternoon and put it on the website of the EPC tracker as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. We'll take one more question and after this we'll come to the answer. Please.
Thank you very much. This is Héctor Sánchez from CIDOP in Barcelona. Thank you very much for the remarks. I share Ilke's views, very interesting. The problem of making, or the difficulty of making questions about the EPC is that its vagueness makes it difficult, no? And I agree with Ilke that the purpose of Moldova for organizing this EPC summit is very clear, no? The political support it will get after it, but it is less clear what will happen in the future when other member states from EPC organize this conference. So my question would be, and I know it's a difficult question, what do you think, for example, you member states can get out of EPC summits, no? Thinking of Madrid or Granada, for example. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the third question, yes.
If possible, thank you. Just a very quick question. My question also, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation to be here. My name is Marta Muchnik from the European Policy Center. As we all sort of collectively struggle to define a more clear purpose for the EPC, I agree very much that the issue of security is key and also I think very much defines a purpose for the EPC, especially because, you know, the war was the common denominator of this exercise. So it makes sense that there's a special focus on this specific dimension. But my question is, how do you see it being coordinated or articulated with other multilateral forums such as NATO and the OSCE in a way that doesn't replicate what's already been done in these other forums, but also, you know, in a way that adds value? How can the European political community really bring added value in the field of security? Because I do agree it's one of the key topics for the EPC, but I'm still struggling to find, you know, where it can add value to in this field. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. We will start with answers and after this we will take another round of questions. Who from the panelists wants to start with advices to politicians? Yes, please, Stephen.
I have been volunteered.
Please, Stephen.
Maybe to Ilke's question, you know, what would be on the priority wish list in terms of outcomes of the EPC? Well, I think Leo already mentioned it in a way. The EPC was conceived as a response primarily to the geopolitical shock that Russia delivered to the entire European security order. Wouldn't it be logical then to at least have a declaration of sorts, you know, on that topic alone, at plenary level? It's astounding that one should infer from the congregation of leaders alone, implicitly, the message that this is supposed to convey. But the articulation of it would, I think, you know, really enhance also the buy-in of perhaps the skeptics or indeed, you know, the wider public that ultimately needs to be served with this additional governmental, intergovernmental, you know, speed dating indeed. So I think that's the absolute minimum. On the other topics that the EPC is discussing, it becomes more difficult, of course, to have a type of plenary declaration other than, you know, some vague notions. But this one is very concrete. So I think it's absolutely key. And then as far as the unilateral decisions are concerned, okay, there's a lot of reference to connectivity issues, energy security. This boils down to very concrete projects in the end, but at least the vision of it at a strategic level could also be articulated. And I think there's some ground to be tilled by, in particular, the upcoming presidencies, if leaders have not cooked up for the Moldova summit a type of declaration. So that's what I would expect from it.
Thank you. Who's next? Yeah.
As for on digital connectivity, wouldn't roaming, roam like at home, wouldn't that be very nice if we could use our mobile phones wherever we are in Europe at the same price? That's what, at least on my wish list.
Thank you, Borja. Leo?
Yes, well, thank you, Steve, for underlining this idea with the statement. And also with the roaming, I think this is a very good also example. I mean, we have Ukraine has a lot of bilateral agreements with, on free roaming, integrated roaming with the EU. Moldova has with some, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Romania and some other. So we need one chapeau basically for this. Yeah, there's already like small pieces which have to be put together. So EPC could be a very good platform for this. But also I would like to reflect on your question of the purpose. And I always remember it used to be very fashionable to refer to EU wanted a ring of friends and got a ring of fire. You remember this? Maybe it was quite often that it was cited in academic papers and in media. Now I think that with the APC we can turn from ring of fire to ring of friends. Maybe. I mean, this, to put it very widely, of course. And also maybe with the coordination of, multilateral coordination. I don't know, I think we have a sort of military EPC already with the Rammstein meetings, yeah, because pretty much the same countries, pretty much, just that there you have to, you get a free cocktail if you have a donation. Here you can get a free cocktail without any donation. So we can just discuss, reflect. I think this provides. With the OSCE, we have Russian OSCE, and this is a problem. This is a big problem. Here we don't have it, so we can do what we should do. We should condemn Russia, strengthen Ukraine, strengthen Moldova, and continue doing, repeat, again this.
Just maybe a follow-up comment. True that Russia is in the OSCE, but the OSCE is coming up with really great reports on human rights violation through the Moscow mechanism on the deportation of children. That's evidence for the International Criminal Court and the other. So the OSCE is hurt, but kicking, especially on things that really matter to. When it comes to deliverables, things related to security to me come like first on the top list, and that requires cybersecurity. I should have thought that the EU and NATO were enough on cybersecurity, but maybe we need to find greater projects that pertain to non-EU, non-NATO countries, but everything cybersecurity, because where we sit now, these countries are, as we speak, attacked, not just attacked. And actually, you guys, Ukrainians, have a lot to contribute in that regard, because you're on the front line and you can actually teach the rest of us on that. Connectivity has been mentioned. Everything related to energy resilience / transition to green, and I think this country a year ago was dependent on Russian gas. Now it's no longer dependent on Russian gas. So we have to factor in that. Those I will put first and foremost. Those I will see as all-encompassing projects for the European political community, and then I see perhaps minilateral deliverables and those things that can be cooked by smaller groups, whether we want to give shape to these unilateral arrangements it remains to be seen, but maybe the EPC is helpful for that. The Brits, because now they're not in the EU, we can talk about the Brits quite freely. So they want to put forward migration. I think that's a terrible idea, and I hope we oppose that wholeheartedly. That's their problem. So, and I don't think that should be an issue for the European political community. Thank you. Leo, Vitayu, just one thing. You mentioned security first, but the problem is that you guys are a candidate country, and inevitably, like, whilst I agree with you on the notion, inevitably for further steps on the EU process, you need to show deliverables. And in my mind, obviously, the 7 conditions tied to the candidacy, you're on good track to meet several of them, but obviously there needs to be some tangible reform progress and the potential to achieve more in order to make further progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Borja. Juana, do you want to add something? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I think indeed, and I understand that among these topics that we mentioned, there are some working streams emerging already from the dialogue among the Sherpas. I would say that, again, maybe we should keep in mind this is a very young initiative, and this organization genuinely has every potential to fail. So I think if we had set clearer objectives, and if while I agree that a final declaration would have been very constructive, very useful, I fear that if that had been set as an objective and other objectives had been added to that, then the whole attention would have shifted to whether this is accomplished or not. And the chances that they wouldn't be accomplished, I think, are quite high. I think at this point, the commitment of some of the participating countries is there precisely because they don't have to sign up to something very concrete. And I think there's a good chance that we might be losing some of the members if we try to be more concrete as early as this. So politically speaking, I do see the point. I know this is not ideal. Obviously, we would have liked things to look very differently, but I think it's a cautious and a necessary way to move forward at this point. And that being said, again, I also wouldn't underestimate the symbolic value of the photo op. And as I understand, Russia has been extremely concerned with this happening in its immediate vicinity. As I hear from my Moldovan friends, the Russian eyes are on this in every possible way, very physically speaking as well. So if Russia is so concerned, then it must be doing something good. So again, I think it's early. We're not very good at this point in Europe in making institutions work and organizations. So maybe taking small, cautious steps is the right way to do it.
Thank you, Juana. And we'll move now to the next questions. Microphone, please, in the second row.
Microphone.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Barbara Lippert from the German Institute for International Security Affairs in Berlin. I think we all agree that the EPC is about coordination and not about integration. But at the same time, I think we're all interested in enhancing the output of this high-level meeting. And so my question concerns a bit let's say, how we can support, let's say, a better outcome. And one idea, of course, is to look at one player, one actor that participates in this meeting, which is not a governmental actor, but the European Commission. it's supposed to be an intergovernmental conference, but European Commission is represented by its president and I think also European Parliament. So is there, from your point of view, a role for the European Commission maybe in cooking up, preparing some more concrete deliverables that could come out of the summit? Second question is, as far as the Eastern Partnership countries are concerned, is there some move towards, let's say, a pre-summit sort of coordination as far as the input for the meeting is concerned, or the drafting of the agenda? And the third question maybe is, do you see a link between what you could imagine as some sort of deliverable in terms of boosting connectivity issues with the flagship projects of the Eastern Partnership? Because there are, of course, already a lot of activities taking place, and there is also initial funding for projects, and maybe one could build on that. So coming up with some more concrete ideas. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Do we have other questions? No. If no, I will ask Julian to start with answering.
Yeah, maybe more obvious panelist will be someone to the west to answer that question, but I'll try, because we all understand that when we talk about connectivity, energy, climate action, or even peace and security, the EU role is essential, because Commission has its hands on the budget. And we know that a good portion of the contribution towards connectivity projects is done by the European Commission. I mean, look at the Connecting Europe facility. We talk about transport, railway, solidarity lanes, energy. All that is basically now forecasted in terms of budgeting for the next 5 to 7 years already. So when we talk about connectivity projects, and if leaders will have new ideas how to better, advance those projects, then the Commission will have to pay, or will have the best, or will have the biggest responsibility or possibility to afford the implementation of these projects. So of course it's normal that we have the President of the European Commission here. It's, I think, from that perspective, again, the role of the European Union is crucial in implementing the ideas that will be developed and hopefully agreed on the occasion of this kind of summits.
Thank you. Do we have some more answers? Please, Stephen.
Maybe I could just add on to that. Barbara also suggested that the European Commission might provide input. I think that is more problematic to certain EPC members, just like the name or the reference to community was already in the name of the EPC was already problematic to some of those same members, or is it singular member perhaps? So in implementation, the European Commission with its projects and with its budget, with its human resources, its know-how, and its established relationships is an obvious channel to seek implementation of some of the commitments made. I want to jump to your third question and the relationship between the Eastern Partnership, its flagship projects, and the EPC. I think when Russia invaded for the second time Ukraine, and in June candidate country status was granted to Ukraine, Moldova, and European perspective to Georgia, there were many that concluded that essentially the Eastern Partnership as a policy framework was more or less dead and should have been discarded. Belarus effectively absorbed by Russia, Armenia and Azerbaijan not having an interest to moving closer, at least at the political statements back then, towards the European Union beyond connectivity issues perhaps. The decision in December of last year at council level, meeting with Eastern Partnership states, was of course to continue the regional framework as such, but essentially there's become a sort of hierarchy between the enlargement policy framework, which has absorbed the trio of the Eastern Partnership and the remaining three. So a level of coexistence between those policy frameworks needs to be found. What I understand the Eastern Partnership is going to evolve in is more of a connectivity program, essentially, and that brings it much closer to some of the objectives of the European political community and would allow, I think, for some of the projects which now have been formulated together with the European Union to get extra backing, new ideas at EPC level. Whether they ought to be implemented then again through the established mechanisms that the EU is providing for it seems logical. So it brings it back to the European Commission ultimately. But the boundaries between those policy frameworks have increasingly blurred over time. So I don't think we need to get hung up by the exact ownership of it. But treat that more in a pragmatic sense if indeed concrete projects can be identified by a unilateral group of countries that happen to belong to the Eastern Partnership as well.
Thank you. Borja, please.
Steve is more civilized than me, and but more or less he preempted some of the things I wanted to say on the Eastern Partnership. To me, I don't know if I had to bet on whether the Eastern Partnership or the European political community will be alive by the end of the decade. I'm not sure which one I will go. So far, I stay with the European political community so far. But I think maybe a final reflection is that Putin's first invasion of Ukraine was, amongst other things, for a policy related to the Eastern Partnership. The DCFTA, association agreement with Ukraine, and how things changed, that nowadays both Ukraine and Moldova are candidate countries. And so, so things change, and that I think bodes well for the future of Europe, for all of our problems, and for the future of Ukraine and Moldova in the EU. So that's something I will be betting for seriously. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Leo?
Yeah, very short, actually. Steve, both, and Borja already mentioned. I just wanted to add that in Ukraine there is a very big allergy to the word Eastern Partnership. It was from the very beginning, not allergy, maybe it's toxicity, I would say, because in the beginning when it was launched, Ukraine was not happy with this because it was put together with countries that have no ambition to join. These days, I think Eastern Partnership, as was mentioned, it will be like Erasmus plus, I don't know, like something like, very soft, very casual exchange between countries. But I hope that, as far as I know, the Swedish presidency prepares some reflection on how to transform the Eastern Partnership. I don't know whether this is true. Maybe our Swedish colleague can discuss this. But I think it would be fair to agree that it doesn't. As a program, maybe for European Commission to manage certain, budget things and management things, maybe it's good. But but let's not put more concept into this initiative than that, I think. That's my perspective. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Julian, please.
Just to add what Leo has mentioned, and Borja and Steve, it's clear that for the trio countries, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, now the policy of the EU is the enlargement policy. Well, now we sit at two tables. We have two which reflect our countries. Is the neighborhood policy, the zoomed-in Eastern Partnership, and the enlargement policy. Well, now we are in the process of transition towards enlargement policy, and I think the first real opportunity will be the fact that we will be assessed by the Commission in the enlargement package. But beyond that, I think while the current presidency of the Council of the European Union is looking how to reshape the Eastern Partnership, we would also want to see the EU looking in how to upgrading and reviewing the enlargement policy to ensure, this transition of these three countries, the new candidate countries, in the enlargement policy, and reflect that into instruments and financing and other, opportunities which are made for the candidate countries. At the same time, Eastern Partnership will exist as long as it will be supported basically financially by the European Union. And I think there is very much more about, it always was basically EU-driven policy. Rather than members or partner countries driven policy, even though we tried. The trio countries has very much behind this kind of using the association agreements to try to reorganize ourselves a bit, having this multi-layered kind of approach. But now as the trio countries are moving to the enlargement policy, I think this has to be reflected in the EU approach. At the same time, I think, we should further continue, our relations and policies and approaches towards the other countries. Belarus will change at some point. I think Belarus has a lot of opportunities of better interconnection with the European Union as well. And the same with Azerbaijan and Armenia. I think the power of attraction to the EU and opportunities which is providing to these countries is very important. And I think we, as candidate countries, can help further these countries, to transfer the instruments and opportunities that we benefit. But for sure, this should not, be like a stumbling block for the countries, for Georgia, for Ukraine, for Moldova to advance on its European path. Because we should recognize, politically that is recognized, not still at the bureaucratic level. It is an ongoing process. But I hope that the new Commission that will come after the next European Parliament election will seriously look into that and reflect that, and I think that would be the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And yes, please, Jacob.
Now it's working, yeah. I'm not an official representative or spokesman for the Swedish EU presidency. I'm an independent analyst, but as the question was mentioned, what you should do with the Eastern Partnership, I don't disagree with what you have said, but the Eastern Partnership is more or less that at official level, but I would like to stress what Julian also said, that there are other layers than the Eastern Partnership can play a role still at the people-to-people contact. And as long as the European Union finances it, I think there's such, like the Eastern Partnership, civil society network and other strands of, is quite important on different levels. The discussion on Eastern Partnership, I think, will continue also after the Swedish EU presidency.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does it work? Yes. Thank you very much for this opportunity to have an exchange with you. My name is Teona Giwashvili, and I'm a fellow at the European University Institute of Florence. So you have emphasized it in your presentation, and it is clear there is broad consensus on this, that EPC is separate from enlargement. It does not substitute the process. However, the fact that these are parallel tracks, it does not mean that they are not connected. So I would be interested in your assessment to what extent EPC can complement or help support the enlargement process of candidate countries, whether it can play a stepping stone role or a safety net, considering that enlargement process would not be as fast as we would like it to be. So, and to what extent also it can complement or be consistent with a form of staged accession of candidate countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Please. Please, the mic.
Yeah, just shortly. Adita Bazimeri from European Policy Institute. I don't want to repeat myself because most of the questions have been said. From all the presentations and what I could heard is that there is a lot of, there is a level of distrust in the EPC still, mainly because of Macron, of course. But how to ensure that this is not one more step to keeping the show on? Or are we satisfied then with keeping the show on, only with that? Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions? No? Thank you. Please, Borja.
Just a quick follow-up, and maybe then Steve would like to talk about stage accession. So to what extent it can complement enlargement? I can think of some, especially if some of these connectivity projects go forward, I can think of perhaps chunks of the technical aspects of the acquis, because obviously people think about the Copenhagen criterion, but you have a long list of acquis communautaire that the candidate countries need to implement. So I can think of those technical questions, even border-related issues, etc., that perhaps some of these deliverables can help candidate countries with. However, perhaps my nuance will be that when it comes to the nitty-gritty issues of constitutional court reform, judicial reform, etc., there's no substitute to basically the candidate countries doing those things on their own, and with support from the Commission and the EU as required. So that will be my quick answer.
Please, Stephen.
Two points. On Macron's ambivalence towards enlargement, on the 1st of September, when he addressed his assembled ambassadors last year, he clearly stated that the EPC might provide an excellent opportunity to stop EU enlargement. That didn't really help, of course, selling the whole idea to candidate countries or potential candidate countries. But I think more substantively to your question, Teona, there's been a terminological inflation, I think, with all these initiatives that are floating around. And I think we should clearly distinguish what Barbara also mentioned, that the EPC is more of a coordination than an integration effort. It is, an opportunity for strategic discussions primarily, and subsidiarily, the definition of concrete projects where there is not necessarily a coherent program or behind it, but incidentals which can be collected and can indeed support other processes, whether they are through the Eastern Partnership or whether they're through EU enlargement. I would clearly distinguish this from the notion of staged accession, which is really set in the enlargement context only, and where essentially, extra benefits are granted only or projected only for candidate countries that are negotiating their membership towards the European Union. Again, I mean, all that helps in that process for those countries is welcome, but I think shouldn't be framed through that policy framework.
Thank you. Juana, please.
Well, I mean, maybe this is the time to address sort of the elephant in the room, which is how much a lot of the EU member states have been reeling from their own decision last June, and how we don't genuinely have an answer, I think even those of us who support enlargement, as to how this is going to happen. I mean, it's one thing to have the political commitment to enlargement and to support it, and it's a completely different thing to be able to answer all of the questions that refer at least to Ukraine, because it's much bigger and it has it presents because of the war challenges that Moldova doesn't. So I do believe that in this context, the EPC can very well go either way. Still, it can either undermine enlargement or it can support enlargement. I think that will very much depend on the political will in the EU member states and how that's going to evolve. On the other hand, I mean, since that reality is there, I think we shouldn't shy away from looking it in the face and acknowledging that at least the political level at which the EPC is taking place allows for the digestion of these doubts and questions and so on and so forth. And I think we are still far from being able to say that when a member state or when somebody says, I support enlargement for Ukraine, for Moldova, and for the Western Balkans, and you know, clearly and unequivocally, they do so with the knowledge of how exactly they're planning on doing that to the end. At every level, technical, political, financial, how that reflects on the European Union processes and so on and so forth. So things are very far from being black and white. Things are very complicated in this region and in Europe. Next year is going to be crucial. Next year we have elections throughout Europe, and I'm afraid things are going to look uglier before they look better. And whatever, I mean, in terms of strategic guidance, it is a fact, I think, that what we don't have by the end of this year is very likely to emerge next year. So perhaps we'll have a bit more clarity by the end of this year. But really, I think the EPC remains either or. I don't think it's going to be clear to us anytime soon whether it's there to weaken or to strengthen enlargement. I think it's a matter of political effort, especially from those interested. I mean, and that goes to the candidate countries, of course, that at this point at least have a presence and at least have an equal footing with everyone else within this format so they can make their case. And I think that's crucial because they need to make their case, that they're very far from having secured anything yet too clearly. Because it's one thing, I'm sorry, but we have learned this the hard way. You know, it's one thing what the EU says, and then, you know, it can be a completely different thing that's being delivered eventually, or just not being delivered at all. So this is work in progress, and I would want to emphasize, because this has been touched upon earlier, in the context of the EAP, the importance of not confusing countries and governments with societies. I'm saying this because I have seen similar enthusiasm, although on a lower scale, as we are seeing now in Moldova. I saw it when Moldova was the poster child of the Eastern Partnership. I saw it during the first Maya Sandu, the technocrat government. And Moldova, for instance, is still the same country that it was 3 years ago. It has, you know, when it had a socialist pro-Russian government, when it seemed to be drifting far, far away from any sort of European perspective. It has a different government, very different in its vision of foreign policy and domestic policy. It has a completely different dynamic, very positive, different circumstances, but the society hasn't changed overnight fundamentally. It's still there. The divisions are still there. The forces that pull in different directions are still there. And I'm saying that not to diminish the importance of what Chișinău has achieved over the past few years, but as a word of warning to many of Moldova's foreign friends who might be choosing to see only what they like to see at this point, and if at some point, and that point is not necessarily very far, I mean, Moldova has elections, you don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, the government doesn't know. So if there's a change in this, I do hope that Moldova's current supporters are not just going to sort of declare failure and disengage, as has been the case with some of the Western Balkan states, for instance, but that we are doubling down on engagement with societies and with the actual drivers of change, because that is crucial, and it hasn't been done so far within the EU enlargement process. It hasn't been done enough. So again, governments are not societies. Societies in this part of the world are much more complex than that, and I hope Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, the ones that are currently not on the map of EU accession, Georgia, which is teetering somehow on the brink, are going to be seen as what they are, meaning societies in motion, and hopefully we can do something so that that motion ends up steering in a certain direction and not another. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Do we have other questions? If no, no? If no, I will thank you for the questions, and I will invite the distinguished panelists to come with your final remarks, if you have any, on the final thoughts regarding the expectations. Yeah? Do you have? Okay, please, Borja.
I don't know about the EPC, but one comment, the EU delivers. Might take time to deliver, not always as pleasant as we wanted, but I think historically, the EU, more often than not, has proved itself up to the task. And I think so that's something I want to say, putting on the official hat.
Thank you.
My final.
Thank you. Do we have other? No? If not, thank you very much for this discussion, and also I want to point here at the end of our discussions that EPC summit is not about EU enlargement discussion, is very connected to strengthening the peace and security in the Europe, identifying solutions, better solution for this. It's a good platform for politicians to discuss among themselves how to build bridges, how to develop joint programs for strengthening the security and connectivity in the Europe. And I really hope that in a very short future, Ukraine and Moldova will say that we accomplished all the recommendations that European Commission provided to us, and will have like a green light for continuing the negotiations for becoming EU members. Thank you for these discussions, and also I will announce that we will have a break now until 2:30, and in the afternoon we'll wait for you here to continue the expert workshop. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just a logistical announcement. We'll have now served the lunch, the networking lunch, so it's a good opportunity to continue the discussion over over some good food. Thank you.